Please welcome our session moderator, former CEO and president of Frieda's Branded Produce, and former president of IWF Southern California, Karen Caplan.
Hyvää huomenta, Helsinki. Good morning, Helsinki. So great to have all of you here, and it's wonderful to be here with our guests. Thank you for joining us this morning for A Brave New World, the transformation of the global diet. On a single day in April of this year, the New York Times published two related articles. One explained how coffee growers in Africa are raising a new species that will better withstand the heat, drought, and disease being supersized by global warming. The other was about Spain, the second largest producer of fruits and vegetables in the European Union. Spain, already ravaged by drought, is experiencing record-setting high temperatures. There are thousands of similar stories unfolding every day on every continent. They all raise this question: how are we going to feed a growing global population when climate change is upending the predictable weather patterns agriculture relies upon? We know the problem is immense. The UN's Food and Agricultural Organization projects that by 2050, we will need 60% more food to feed a world population of 9.3 billion people. So, we need to produce more nutritious food in a more sustainable way in the context of a climate influx. We have gathered two experts in this arena to discuss the problems and the solutions. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that we will have questions at the end, and we'd like you to take out your conference app, or your iPhones, your phones, open the app, scroll down to open Q&A, select A Brave New World, and type in your question. We'll have 15 minutes for questions at the end. So, our panelists. So please welcome my friend, a woman who's been an impact investor and asset manager focusing on sustainable agriculture, a member of the board of California Harvesters, and president of Frutura, a global sales and marketing company providing fresh produce 365 days a year. A member of IWF Southern California, Dr. Lloys Frates. Also joining us is a really fun person, a scientist turned investor with a PhD in biotechnology, a founder of Nordic Food VC, Dr. Lauri Reuter. So it's just great to have you both with us. We'll dig right in, because I know having enough food is really important for all of us. So Lloys, how urgent is this confluence of climate change and the need to increase food production?
I mean, it's extremely urgent. It's not only an urgent issue, it's an imperative issue. So food is the greatest single lever we have to impact human health and the environment. But when we start to look at solutions, I don't think we can just focus on health and the environment. We need to find a sweet spot between health, environment, and culture, because culture and food are so intertwined, right? So any solutions that we come up with, we have to consider culture, and culture has been really underemphasized in these discussions. So as we look for solutions to develop to address health and environment, we also have to find solutions that are culturally appropriate.
So be respectful.
Respectful, right. And also honor tradition, culture, religion, heritage, because if you have to choose between that and health, whether it be your own health or health of the environment, some people will choose health, but a lot of people will choose heritage.
So, Lauri,
It's great that you mentioned culture. I mean, we have human culture only because we have agriculture. We started agriculture roughly 10,000 years ago, and that meant that some of us could spend some time not hunting and gathering and doing something else. We could divide work so that we could build culture and technology and everything that we have as human society. So why 10,000 years ago? Why not 20,000 years ago? Because the climate was not stable 20,000 years ago. It became stable roughly 10,000 years ago. So we have lived through this period of extremely stable climate for the past 10,000 years. And now that time is over. Climate is changing, no matter what we do at this point anymore. So we need to learn to live with an unpredictable climate that has supported the agriculture this far. So, yeah, I mean, it's really about human culture and human civilization, this whole thing. It's really, really urgent.
so I want you to know that when you leave today, you will feel very hopeful. That was the theme yesterday.
We'll start from here.
Yes. So when the three of us got together, we know that there's plenty of food. And there will be plenty of food. But we just want to talk you through that process to make you understand what you can do.
Sorry,
So,
she
yes.
promised I will be fun.
Yeah, so don't, everything will be okay. So let's talk about possible solutions. So Lloys, I know you're going to tell everyone actually what you do besides fruits and vegetables, is I believe you're adopting some new practices and technologies to maintain or increase production so we can have enough food with a concern for minimizing environmental effects. So why don't you...
Yeah, and Lauri spoke to it a little bit. We have to change the way we farm, right? Arable land is decreasing, and we cannot sacrifice any more habitat and biodiversity to agriculture. So we have to find ways to do more with less. So in the field that I work in, which as you mentioned is, we call it permanent specialty crops, but what that means is anything that grows on a tree, a vine, or a bush. So we grow avocados, citrus, berries, grapes. We're really focused on two major things. One is water, because that is the single most pressing issue for us and our survival and sustainability. And the other is plant genetics. So with water, there are a ton of really interesting, really great technologies out there, whether they be sensors, smart irrigation. Our farmers can now run everything from their cell phones, so they can do everything in real time. If there's a leak, they can turn it off. And so we're employing all of those water conservation technologies, and there's new ones developing all the time. But in our field, perhaps one of the most impactful things we're doing is groundwater banking. So in the US West, Chile, the Western Cape of South Africa, major growing regions, it rains when it's winter, and the crops don't need the water. And most of that water flows to the oceans. So most of these countries have a series of very old hydrogeological system of dams and reservoirs that are supposed to capture this water, and we're able to use it in the summer when the crops need it. But to your point, in Spain, drought has gotten worse, rains have gotten heavier, and you can't catch all that water. So most of that water runs to the ocean. And we should not be building new dams and reservoirs. They're extremely environmentally impactful in a very negative way. So what do, right? We have all this water, we lose it. So one of the things we've employed, and our industry is employing, and in a way it's a bit difficult because the way governments work with water and water rights, in some countries you have to navigate through that, but is groundwater banking. So we basically take the natural aquifer, which in most cases has been depleted because over time the farmers have been pumping the water and the water's going down. We take that water when it rains, when it's wet, we percolate it into the ground, it stays in the aquifer, and then when we need it, we pump it out. And the great thing is this is an environmentally sustainable way to catch that water that would have been lost and gone to the ocean. And best practice is to leave about 10% of that water behind, So that helps the health of the aquifer. The water starts coming up, so everyone around us is happy because groundwater isn't as deep. You don't have to pump as much. You don't need as much energy to pump that water.
Explain what an aquifer is for those of us not in the industry.
An aquifer is basically a big bowl underground, right? So you have rock underground, and it has all these different patterns, and water will settle. I mean, you're a scientist, I'm not. But water will settle in those bowls. And farmers tend to draw the water for their farms from specific aquifers. And those aquifers are typically regulated, although the regulations are often not enforced. But this is a thing that we're doing to really maximize that water and make sure we don't lose that water so we can use it when we need it. The other thing we're doing a lot of is plant genetics. So we can breed plants, and Lauri will talk a lot more about this, that use less water, that use less fertilizers and other inputs, and also produce more yield per hectare. So essentially growing more food on the same amount of land that we have now. So we don't have to cut down more rainforests. We don't have to impede into more habitat and destroy more biodiversity. So in our field, at least, those are the two major things that we're focused on and we're doing.
So, Lauri, do you think that these kinds of adaptations that Lloys mentioned with water and plant genetics are going to be enough to meet this increased global food demand?
They are absolutely necessary. We need to do all that. I don't think it's enough. I mean, I think we need to do a lot more as well. I mean, well, put it this way. I mean, struggling with these food crises that we have had many times before already, it's a bit like running, right? If you take a snapshot of a runner, it seems that they're falling on their face. But we know that they're going to take the next step, so they're not going to fall, they're going to run, right? And it's the same thing with our food system. I mean, we have been living through a crisis with food throughout all of our history, and we have built a solution after a solution and transformed our food system many times before already. So this time, we're gonna have to smarten up with our food production in so many ways, but we also need to create something that might now seem like completely new things, so very radically new things. As an example, I just spent the past 2 days actually at Scandic Park. Many of you are staying there, right? Did you notice there was a bunch of geeks just swarming around there? Yeah. So I was one of those geeks. There was a cellular agriculture conference in Scandic Park. Cellular agriculture might seem like a bizarre word. So we have relied on plants and animals in our food production for the past 10,000 years. We have not used microbes because, well, microbes are small. It's really hard to hunt and gather them. You would go hungry. And we really haven't had the technologies to farm them in the past, but now we do. So cellular agriculture is all about using different microbes, whether it's microfungi or yeast or bacteria or algae, animal cells, plant cells, all kinds of single cell life for food production. And it's something completely new. I mean, it has nothing to do with the farming we do now. For example, there is a company in Finland called Solar Foods. They went digging around and they found a microbe in the soil that uses gases as food and hydrogen as an energy source. So fundamentally, you can put that in a tank, pump carbon dioxide in there, and power it up with electricity, and it will grow. And you can harvest this yellow powder that is super rich in protein and vitamin B12 and iron and all the stuff we need. And you can make food out of it, literally out of thin air.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It tastes a bit like...
I'm going for Lloys.
I mean, you should try it. It tastes a bit like buttered popcorn. I mean, it's great. I mean, would you eat like wheat flour? No, you wouldn't eat wheat flour. You would bake a bread out of it. And this is an ingredient in the same way. And they're producing it already, and they launched yesterday. They launched yesterday the first ice cream made out of this stuff in Singapore. So you have to go for that ice cream.
We have some Singapore members here.
this is transformative because for this kind of food production, you don't need any of those fields. So it's a complete decoupling from the agriculture as we know it. And yes, we need to smarten up with our agriculture as it is. We need to get much better with it. We need a massive shift in our diets, but we will also need these completely new technologies. And it's a sum of all of that.
It's a change, yes.
Yeah.
So if I may, I totally agree with you. I think we should not be playing a zero-sums game here,
Yeah.
right? It's not this versus that, what I do versus you do. It's not, bugs versus meat versus plants versus, we need every environmental sustainable technology we can have. But we have to look at cultural appropriateness, right? I mean, you can't shove things down people's throats and say, eat your vegetables, if it's not culturally appropriate, right? So in looking at that, and hopefully in that toolkit, we'll have so many different tools that there are enough tools in there that we can meet cultural appropriateness for every culture on the planet.
Okay, I'm the Finn here, and there's many Americans here, so I'm not going to be culturally appropriate. I mean,
Knock yourself out.
Culture changes, right? I mean, the fact that so many of us are eating so much beef is not some culture that we have had forever. It's a new thing. And don't lie to yourself and say that, this is my culture, this won't change. You just learned to do that in the past couple of decades. So that culture has to change. I don't care if that's appropriate or not, but that has to change. So we also need, it's hard to shove things down people's throat, and we shouldn't be violent with that. But some parts of the culture we have right now will have to change, and it will be part of it.
Agreed, but there are pastoral societies in the global south who rely on animals, right? And when you strip that from them, they lose a great deal, right? So we have to find that balance.
You're right.
We have to find the balance where we can meet people's needs, honor their cultures, their traditions, their religions, their heritage, and also, but the good news is
yellow
there's a
powder
bunch of,
that grows from stuff in the ground.
It's not the really small agricultural societies that are the problem. It's us living. It's us living in the global north, in the big cities, the urban cultures. So it's us that need to change the most. It's not someone living somewhere very far remotely and actually living very sustainably, even though they might be eating only animals. But in that cultural context, in that scale, it works out. It's totally fine.
So let's go a little bit in a different direction. So there's always been a conflict, right, between big ag, what we call in our industry big ag, and the need to support small subsistence farmers that are essential, especially in small, remote, not in the north, in the south, that are essential to food supply in many places. So how is agriculture dealing with this? And do you think in the future food, is there room for both? Big ag, and small farmers.
Are you asking me or Lauri?
I'm asking you.
Okay.
You're the farmer.
So we cannot ignore small farmers. 3/4 of the world's poor live in rural areas, and most of them rely on farming. So if we ignore them, we are saying just go off and be poor and struggle for the rest of your life, and that is not a solution. So we have to do something. And there's the good news, and this is where we get to the hope. There's some really interesting examples out there. So you mentioned coffee in your introduction. There's an organization called the World Coffee Research Organization. And basically what this is a group of all the major coffee roasters in the world, other than Nestle. And
Big ag.
But this is Starbucks, Illy, Peet's, whatever the big roaster is in your part of the world, they're in it. And basically what they do is they pass the costs on to the consumer. So in the global north and affluent countries, we're paying a little more for our coffee to fund their activities. And they have realized that their success and sustainability is directly tied to the success and sustainability of their growers. So they take this money that we pay when we buy our coffee, and they fund research, and they fund trials, and they fund different support for growers. So they're doing technology, they're doing genetics, they're doing plant trials, figuring out which plants grow in which regions the best. They're providing plant material through nurseries. So the good news is there are a bunch of examples like this out there. Small farmers are complicated. In my business, a small farmer is 10, 20, even 50 hectares. In coffee, it's like a half a hectare. I think the average small grower in coffee is 1.4 hectares. So that's a lot of people you gotta get to and help and get them technology in their hands when they can't afford to use technology. But the good news is there's a lot of templates out there. There's a lot of efforts on which we can build. We don't have to invent the wheel. We just have to get in there and lean into it and make sure that we are considering small farmers, we're valuing small farmers, and we're helping them be part of a sustainable future.
Yeah.
I agree with all of that. So for a long time we have been super worried about, that the poor people on the planet get enough food. So when we talk about food crisis, we thought, how to provide enough food for the poor. That is part of the crisis we are in now. But I would say, from my perspective, a larger part of the environmental crisis is about the food that we, the wealthy people in global north, are eating. So it's us that cause the environmental damage with what we are eating. The small-scale farmers, the subsistence farmers, they need to be supported, and we don't want to disrupt their livelihoods. But they're not causing the massive problems in our food system when it comes to the environmental impact. So I'm more in my work dealing with, how do we solve this environmental damage that we cause with our diets? So we need to focus on that as well. But that's the thing with food. It's not one problem that we need to solve. It's actually many, many problems, and we need to solve them at the same time without making too much new problems and making some of the other existing problems even worse. So it's really complicated.
So let's go to meat.
Yeah.
Okay. So that might be a culprit for some of our global warming challenges. So Lloys, let's talk a little bit about animals and meat. You have a graphic that's magically going to, there it is, it magically appeared, which shows foods that contrast the high nutrition with their carbon footprint. So why don't you walk everyone through this and focus on the meat?
Yeah, I really like this graphic because it's super straightforward, right? The food pyramid is on the left. At the bottom are the things we're supposed to eat in the most quantity.
That's a USA-based food pyramid.
But I think generally for human health, this fits the recommendations, right? At the top are the things we're supposed to eat in the most moderation. What's interesting and what may be new to people is the one on the right. So this is the environmental pyramid. So the foods at the bottom are the foods that have the lowest environmental impact, and the foods at the top are the ones that have the greatest environmental impact. And Lauri's right. The meat problem is a problem of affluence, right? It's a problem in the global north. We eat too much meat. But this is really straightforward, actually. I mean, it lines up almost exactly, right? You have fruits at the bottom, and then vegetables, and then grains and legumes and nuts going up to red meat at the top. And so environment's over here, health is over here, they line up. My question is, why aren't we doing it?
Yeah.
Right? Because this is not complicated. I mean, it may be complicated to enact, but it's not a complicated, to understand.
Concept.
And so I would say one of the things, is access, right? We produce enough food to feed the world, but only 55% of us have that access to that recommended 4 to 6 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. So although we are farming enough in quantity, we're not focusing on the quantity of healthy food. So we need to shift our farming mindset from farming enough food to farming enough healthy food, right? And that's a big shift, and we have to move in that direction for our health and for the health of the planet. I think the other thing, again, is cultural, right? Food, tradition, culture, heritage, they're very intertwined. And so for us to sit in the global north and very affluent places and say, okay, everybody has to go plant-based, right? That may or may not sit well with you depending on your culture, your heritage, your tradition, your comfort foods. So, we have to navigate through all of that. And if we ignore that culture piece, again, I don't think we get there.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, changing this sounds very simple. We could also have the picture of the planetary health diet, which is very similar picture. I mean, it's the same sort of diet that you should follow in order to fix the food system for the climate and to fix it for your health. I mean,
tell us more
those
about
things
that.
go hand in hand. And, in the rough picture, I mean, in the global north, we should reduce our meat and dairy consumption by something like 90%. So you can still have your steak on Sundays. But the rest of it should be mostly plant-based, mostly, diversity of plants, nuts, legumes. And that would fix a lot. It would fix a lot for the climate, it would fix a lot for the environment, it would fix a lot for your own health. And when you said that, we need up to 60% more food by 2050, that's not because there's more people on the planet. That's because the people on the planet are eating more meat and dairy. That's because societies are getting wealthier, and when people get wealthier, for some reason, they tend to eat more animal-based foods. So that's what we need to change. And we need to fix a lot of things by 2030 for the climate. Now, cellular agriculture or plant genetics and these new technologies in farming, they will be a lot of help, but 2030 is really soon. So whatever new technology we have won't really make a big dent by 2030.
So
these could. You could all do this today, right? What prevents you? Culture?
So meat, or a facsimile of meat, is now being produced in the lab. That's your area of expertise. So tell us quickly, what progress is being made? I don't know if anyone has had plant-based meat or cellular meat. Meat.
It is meat.
So what progress is being made, not only on taste and texture, but on consumers wanting to enjoy that?
So we had a long discussion over the past couple of days about the consumer perception. Or actually, we had a discussion about not having a discussion, because that was a topic 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were asking questions, would consumers accept plant-based or cell-cultured meat? Now everybody in the conference agreed that, we don't need to see those graphs anymore. When you get a good enough product in front of the consumer, they will eat it. They will be happy with it. Just like, if you would have given, a kiwi fruit to a European like 50 years ago, we'll be like, what is this, a hairy thing? I'm not going to eat that. But now we're happy with it, because we got used to it. So the same thing with all kinds of these new food products. We will get used to those if they taste great, if they are cheap enough, and if they are nutritionally okay. So changing your habits in eating a lot of meat. One thing is just, decide to do that and just do it. Another path, maybe a path of less resistance would be to give you a product that is equal in quality. You still get the experience of eating meat, but it's just produced in a smarter way. Right, so there's two ways of doing that. One, you make that meat out of plants, which is difficult, but we have pretty good technologies for that. I mean, there are some inherent things about animal biomass that taste different, like the fats and it goes brown when you cook it and all the flavor in it. We can go pretty close with plants. The other way would be to take animal cells out of an animal and grow them in a bioreactor and grow meat that is actually animal tissue, but grown in a different way, and make a food out of that. Now, plant-based meats are out there. It's the first generation of those. They're still expensive. They're still not great nutritionally. They're okay, but they're not great. And the taste is meh. It's kind of. I mean, if you're in US, Impossible Foods is doing a pretty good job, but we're getting there. The second generation will be a different story. I mean, those will be good because we have new technology.
So do you think, though, these like Impossible Foods, so they talk about a meat substitute,
Yeah.
but I don't ever hear it's better for the planet and it's better for your body.
Yeah, it's not better for your body. It's still fatty and salty, but it's a whole lot better for the planet. And it's a whole lot better for animal ethics. I mean, you don't need an animal that you should treat ethically. You don't hear that? Oh, they should talk more about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I mean, it's sort of. I think it's a short-term solution. I mean, it kind of bypasses that cultural change. I mean, you could just equally well just eat plants, but because we want that burger and we want that to taste and look the same we used to. So for that short-term solution, we need these sort of imitating products. But in long term, there's nothing that we inherently need in our diet that is sort of meaty and goes brown when you cook it and is fatty and salty.
Okay, so
We
if they don't
necessarily
want
need that.
fake meat, what about bugs?
I mean, bugs are really interesting. There's a lot of promise in bugs. There was that New
Has
Yorker
anyone
article.
eaten bugs? Really? Okay, well, I have
haven't?
not.
You
I
have
am a bug virgin. Tell us about bugs.
Look, I think there's a lot of promise in bugs. And again, I would say, in that toolkit of all the things that we have, bugs could be one of them. I don't think bugs are going to feed the entire planet, right? I mean, they're probably pretty easy to breed, I would think, but we may be creating other problems with doing that. But again, vegans and vegetarians aren't going to eat them. There's some religions that prohibit eating bugs. For those of us who are from cultures that don't eat bugs, there's kind of an ick factor. Let's just, own it, right? I recently went to the Lion King with my daughter, and I don't know if you guys remember the movie or the play, but Simba leaves his tribe, and he runs into a meerkat and a warthog, and they're trying to get him to eat grubs. And they keep saying things like, tastes like chicken, slimy but satisfying, And I just don't think, and to your point, we don't have the time to educate everyone, convince everyone that bugs are yummy, right? So it's part of a tool that's in our
Agreed.
toolkit, and there are places where people eat bugs, and I think they would consume more, but I don't think it's, there's
The
no
future is
panacea
not
here.
bugs.
Yeah, there's no, yeah.
But, bugs are animals, right? So if you have a cricket and you feed grain to a cricket and then you make a nugget out of the cricket is chicken with 6 legs, right? It's nothing else. I mean, from systems perspective, it's still a chicken with 6 legs. So
Okay, well, there you go.
So it's not a solution,
Okay.
right?
Lori, we're going in a different direction. Sorry I brought up bugs.
Well, I like this direction.
A cricket is a chicken with 6 legs.
Yeah, that's your
They
take-home
heard
message.
it here first.
Or chicken is just another bug with 2 legs. If you
Thanks. Okay, so Lauri, you run a venture capital firm, okay, that invests in biotech. So is there a lot of VC interest in biotech, and do you think it's a short-term interest or a long-term play?
So we started a VC fund 2020, and at that time we were proud to be the first food tech investor in the Nordics. So there was no other VC fund that would invest. That's why we started the fund, out of frustration. Now we're not the only one anymore. Now there's, I think, around 10 funds investing in food in Nordics alone. So food tech investing has become a thing in the past, let's say, 5 years globally. So there's much more risk capital flowing into new technologies that would fix something in food system. And that is a great thing because food industry, as such, the big food industry, is not really innovative. I mean, the R&D spending of big food is minimal. It's somewhere around 4% of revenue, whereas tech companies, it's 20%. So food industry is not really innovative. So we need new companies to bring the innovation into the food system. And that's why we also need a lot of risk capital to it. Did that answer the question?
Do you want to comment?
No, I would agree. The same thing's happening in ag tech,
Yeah.
right? So there's a lot of investment in ag tech. You used to have these ag tech conferences, and it was like S2G from Chicago and nobody else, right? And now it's all over the place, and they're incubating technologies as well, which I think is really great,
I think a big difference in kind of past 2 years has been that food tech and ag tech is seen now as climate tech. And that makes a different story because now it's the climate investors also investing in food, which kind of multiplies the amount of money that flows into it. And it's great. It's good.
So we talked when we were sitting over there about biotech, genetic engineering, and GMOs. So we need new technology to help us have enough food to feed the planet, have enough food sustainably grown. So I'm sure there are people here in the audience that wonder, does that mean we're going to have frankenfoods? We're going to have genes from an animal put in a vegetable? So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Actually, I don't want to talk about GMOs. So actually, I would like for all of us to forget, that abbreviation because that has a really bad, sound to it. Instead of talking about GMOs, I would like to talk about the kinds of plants and animals and organisms that we use for food production, the properties of those, not how they were created, because GMO just defines a very specific toolbox that we used in breeding to come up with a plant or whatever it is. And that doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter what color was the hammer that you used to build a house. What matters is what is the house like? So what are the properties of it? So the fact that a plant was genetically engineered or GMO does not matter at all. What matters is, is it drought resistant? Is it pest resistant? Does it provide a better yield? Or also, is it toxic? We need to figure out if it's toxic, and if it is, let's not do it. But plants can be toxic also without genetic engineering.
Well, I also think not all genetics are GMOs or genetically engineered, right? There's a bunch of different ways to do genetics. So traditional crossbreeding, like roses, you take a male and a female parent, you cross them, they have a bunch of children, you kill the ugly ones, you keep the beautiful ones, you keep breeding the beautiful ones, and you hope you get these beautiful roses. It's what we do in table grapes, it's what we do in stone fruit. So in fruits, for example, the only genetically engineered fruit is the papaya, right? Everything else is crossbreeding. And then there's other technologies, gene editing and other things like that. So again, I totally agree with you. Look, I think every technology can be put to good or it can be put to ill, right? And what we need is the regulations, the transparency, the enforcement to make sure that it's done. But it has to be done smart, because we were having a conversation about US versus EU and how that can stifle innovation. And there are a lot of advances we can make with genetics. We can use less water, we can use less fertilizers, we can get more yield per hectare, and those things really, really, really matter. So we have to have regulations that are smart, but also the transparency and enforcement around that.
And I'm not saying we should not have regulation around technology. We need that. But when we regulate new technology, we need to assess the risks involved in that technology, in use of that technology, but also the risks of not doing that, not using the technology. And right now, the risk of not doing anything is huge. Yeah. So
that we won't have enough food.
I would even be happy, taking a little bit of risk in solving these problems over not doing anything, because it's a shit show.
So I wanted the audience to understand. Did you say a shit show?
Yeah.
Oh, you did? Okay. I told them they could say one bad word. But I wanted our audience to know that there is good engineering, good science that will help us have more food. But now we're going to go to some questions from the audience, because I'm sure that got a few people going. So where are the audience questions? Are there audience questions? Well, hold on. You had to do it on the app. So okay. Are we there? Okay. So from Cynthia Pine in the United Kingdom, when bringing in foods developed from new technologies, how do we avoid the pitfalls of ultra-processed foods?
Can I?
Yeah,
please go. That is a meaty subject.
So here's another bias. So there has been a lot of headlines about ultra-processed food being bad. When you go into these food tech and food conferences, it's a frustration about this, because ultra-processed does not equal bad for your health. There's just absolutely nothing that would make processed food unhealthy. There's just a correlation. If you look at people who eat a lot of ultra-processed food, they are unhealthy. So it's about diets. It's about what kind of diets they generally eat. It's not the processing of food that makes it unhealthy. It's the fact that you have a lot of, prepared food, ready-made food, processed food in your diet. I mean, boiling potatoes is processing, right? So
I don't think that's what they're talking about.
Exactly, but that's the thing. That's the thing. It is processing. So we're getting mixed up with terminology here. I mean, we need to make sure that foods are healthy. We need to make sure that diets are healthy. And that can mean that we can also ultra-process a lot of food. I mean, think about a really healthy bread. I mean, in order to get that grain into the bread, there's a ton of processing in between. Think of milk. I mean, there's a lot of processing before milk ends up being cheese. So those would be defined as ultra-processed.
So what I would suggest, is number one, read the labels. And then if you look at the food, no matter what it is, if it's GMO, bioengineered, or bred, if you can't figure out what it came from, then you probably shouldn't eat it. Eat whole foods. Right?
I mean, if you,
Next
how
question.
many of you in the audience knows how cheese is made? Like really, from the beginning to the end?
We're not talking about cheese.
Yeah.
Okay, but thank you.
You know,
Okay, so we're going to the next.
we have-
We're going to the next question.
We normal people, we have no idea anymore how cheese is made or how food is traditionally made. So I actually don't think that's a good advice. I think what you should do is look at your whole diet. Look at all the things you eat. If it's all packaged.
Well, they now want to know what you eat. So we're going to the next question.
Ah.
So how do each of you eat in a way that reflects what you know and what your values are? That's a great question, by the way.
Yeah, it's a tricky one too, right? I think from
No one will audit what you really do eat.
No, and I'm not going to, I think that's a really great question. I also think we should think about what we don't eat, and that's food waste, right? There is so much food. We have to reduce food waste and food loss by about 50%. So if we buy in bulk and think it's less expensive, it's only less expensive if you use it all, right? We are throwing away far too much food. And some of that is in the system, it's in the supply chain, and as individuals, we can't do a lot about that, but a lot of it's us, And so we need to understand best buy and sell by dates. We need to understand when food is unsafe, when food is rotten, because they don't line up with those dates. We're throwing away plenty of good food. And there's all kinds of things we can do to reduce our food waste. And again, it's a problem of affluence, right? In certain places, there's not a food waste problem, right? Nobody throws anything away, but we throw a lot of it away. Yeah. And unless we reduce that, massively, we are going to have a huge problem. So, the US EPA has a great toolkit on their website. I'm sure there's other ones that, helps consumers to figure out like how to manage your food, how to minimize food waste. But we really need to, so what we eat is important, but what we're not eating and throwing away is also extremely important for the planet.
To me, the most satisfactory meal is when I take a look at my fridge and then find all the scraps and all the stuff that is kind of leftovers, and I can actually make something edible out of that. That satisfaction it feels good.
And that's like to no food waste.
Yeah, exactly.
I do the same
Exactly,
thing.
Yeah. But yeah, to the question, I eat very little amounts of animals. I'm not vegan. I do eat animals still. I think it's, from environmental perspective, health perspective, we can. But, it's not about meatless Mondays. It's about having meat on Sundays. That's what we should be doing. I used to eat chicken because environmentally, relatively sound actually. It's a good way of producing animal protein from climate perspective. Then I visited a couple of
Chicken farms.
chicken farms,
Yeah.
and I have not touched chicken ever since. So it's also how you feel about food, and once you know, then you might feel very differently about it. So I don't eat chicken anymore. I used to eat fish.
Next question.
I used to eat fish because, fish, relatively sound environmentally. Then I went to a couple of fish farms. Yeah, it's only wild fish from now on.
Okay, so this is from Ziva Patir in Israel. The prices of manufactured foods have stayed relatively stable while prices of fresh fruits, vegetables, meat, and fish have increased dramatically. So how, under these circumstances, can we influence people to eat a healthier diet?
Yeah, I'll talk. A lot of this has to do with the complexity of food that rots, very quickly, right? And so with a table grape, for every hour you don't keep that table grape at 32 degrees, you lose a week of shelf life. A raspberry lasts 12 days on a shelf in a supermarket. And a lot of our supermarkets don't refrigerate fruits, right? So they don't ripen when you pick them. They rot when you pick them. They're rotting from the time you get them. So we invest a lot in, the cold chain and cold storage.
And that raises the cost.
It's extremely expensive, right? And then agriculture is a low-margin business. Let's get real. The margins are captured at the retailer, not by the big agricultural companies and the farmers. We do better in fruits than they do, in vegetables and then broadacre agronomic crops. The margins are even lower. So I think we need international and national commitment to healthy diets, right? That's what we need. We have to get behind it, we have to prioritize it, and we have to make sure that affordable fruits and vegetables and legumes and nuts are available to people.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be a bit, counterintuitive, manufactured foods are great from food waste perspective.
They last forever.
They last forever.
Because
I mean,
of preservatives.
Yeah. I mean, freezing stuff is a very good way of preserving food. It stays very fresh and less food waste. So it's not always so intuitive when it comes to food. So how could we influence this? Meat and dairy is subsidized a lot. If you would, know the amount of money we pour as taxpayers into the production of meat and dairy is insane. The real price of those products is not what we pay at supermarket. So that is one way of nudging diets towards a healthier direction. The amount of global agricultural subsidies that actually support more sustainable food system is something like, less than 10%. 90% is subsidizing, a harmful production of food for the environmental perspective. So subsidies, a major thing. And then it's a lot about, retail. Retail nudges quite a lot of, what kind of things we eat and what kind of things are available for us. So I don't know how the society could influence that.
So coming from the fresh produce industry, I think it starts with educating children about what's good for their body. I think that the super processed foods, many of them have preservatives and high fructose sugar that's addictive. And we give our kids sugar as a reward. So if you're good, you get M&Ms or you get a cake, right? So that naturally makes them want to eat those things that are not healthy. So I think it starts with education. And ask yourself how you feel after you eat something. When you eat fresh grapes, are my favorite snack, or little mini oranges. I feel great after I eat those. If we can educate people to say, how do you feel? Your stomach doesn't hurt, you're not run down, so you feel fantastic when you're eating all those fresh fruits and vegetables. Let's go to the next question. Okay, let's see, from Rebecca Masiera Kaufman of IWF Northern California. Why are we so focused on fake meat versus focusing on diets of chickpeas or garbanzo beans, tofu, legumes, etc., that taste like themselves versus, I love this question, a replicated taste? We started eating kiwi. I have to say my mom introduced kiwi fruit to America, so every time you mention kiwi, I get very excited. So thank you very much, Rebecca, for mentioning kiwi. We started eating kiwi without making it taste like an orange, but it took a lot, by the way, to get people to eat kiwi. So why are we not more focused on the Mediterranean diet?
Mediterranean diet is great. I mean, yes, do it. Also, Nordic diet, it's also great. I mean, there's many ways to compile a really good, healthy diet that is also good for the environment. There's many ways of doing it. There's not one single Mediterranean diet that would be, the ideal or perfect. There's many ways of doing it. We should do it. Why we need alternative ways of producing meat? Because we are so used to eating burgers. And we're so used to eating the animal-based products that we do. It's just a shortcut to do that cultural shift. Mm-hmm. Nothing more. It's an intermediate, solution for now. And hopefully in the future, we're all okay eating falafel and tofu.
Lloys?
Yeah. I see it like Nicorette. Is that what it's called? The gum you chew when you're trying to stop smoking, right? It's a way to get to, to the next thing, right? So we're used to
fake
eating
food
meat.
is like
people like
Nicorette.
it. They like a burger, and it's a way for them to have that satisfaction without having to give it up. But ultimately, the goal would be to move to a more sustainable, for health and the planet diet.
So it might be a good idea to make them taste actually quite bad.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
So we
so
always
we would
say,
grow out of that habit.
so people vote with their dollars.
Yeah.
So if people buy, where did the question go? Falafel and tofu instead of Impossible Burgers, then naturally that's where the way.
But that's the thing.
Go.
We have been telling people to eat more plants for a long time, and is it happening? No, it's not happening. So I think the genius idea behind all of these, alternative meats is that, if you cannot take the burger away from Americans, you have to replace it with something that is equal, that gives the same experience. And I think it's brilliant. but it's not necessarily, the thing to do in the long term. It's just, a way to get that change happening faster.
But that's where genetics can come in too. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the cotton candy grape, right?
Yeah.
So going
You
to
guys
your
know
point,
what that is, the cotton candy grape? It's the
Yeah.
grapes, natural breeding, that tastes like cotton candy.
So to your point, we subsidize, in the US, no fruits are subsidized at all. There are no subsidies for fruits. We subsidize sugar, we subsidize beef, we subsidize broad acre agronomic crops from the Midwest, right? That's the history of the US,
America.
right? But what they've done with innovation and breeding is they've bred a grape to taste like candy, right? And so you give these to children, and it's a great replacement, right? So again, people don't want to give up candy. They want to have that experience. They want to have that taste. Children are, biologically predisposed for sweet, but you can give them a healthy thing. So again, there are ways we can do this where we can satisfy people, where we can meet their needs and their desires and also have it be healthy.
So I promised everyone in the audience that you would leave with hope, right? So you've left with a lot of information about bugs and not eating bugs and bioengineering. But I've asked both Lauri and Lloys to have one piece of advice. So is there one thing each of us in the audience could do to change our habits or our diets that would help the planet and that would help our bodies? So I'm going to go to you, Lloys, first, and then Lauri.
Well, I kind of already threw it out there. I think food waste is the low-hanging fruit, right? That's something we can all do. We can do it immediately. We don't have to change our diets. We don't have to give anything up. We just have to manage the way we manage food more effectively. And so I think, has a huge impact, and it's something that we can all do. And it's actually fairly simple to do if you sort of pay attention to it and dig into it. So I would say food waste is a first way of getting through all of the things we need to do, as a society, as a planet.
So does anyone have a rotting drawer in their refrigerator? A rotting drawer. That's where you put all the good intentions of produce and fruits and vegetables that you bought, right? And at the end of the week, you open it up and you're like, shit. Right? And you throw it out. That's what the food waste she's talking about. I know for me personally, I have spent a lot of time deciding what not to buy. Right? I'd rather go to the store or to the farmer's market more often so I don't have food waste. And that would really help other consumers on the planet. Lauri, what's your one piece of advice?
I already mentioned, it's diets. It's shifting diets is the one thing we don't need any new technology for that. We can do it today. We can do it right now. You don't need to do it all on one go. We should start moving from eating a lot of animal-based products into eating very little of those. You don't need to go all the way to being vegan if that's not your thing, but move from meatless Mondays to steak on Sundays.
So eat more plants, right?
Eat more plants, eat more diverse plants, eat more exciting and delicious plants. That's the biggest favor you can do for the planet and for your own health. So there's just really no excuses. Yeah,
so eat more plants and don't buy too much food. That's the message for today. So let's thank both of them for this healthy debate.
Thanks, Karen.
You did great.